So I'm going to start out with, it's about a minute and a half of sheer propaganda. That's something we put together about 3 or 4 years ago when Forefry was just starting out, and it's a way to help the public understand basically what's forest restoration about. So I'm going to get into, I can't stand holding a mic unless I'm singing, and I don't have a band, so anyway. I'm going to go into some of the details of where that whole thing came from. How does it start? How does the conversation start? I guess I am going to walk around. It starts out often with an event. In the case of Forefry, it started out with the Rodeo Chediskai fire and a discussion between the governor of Arizona and land management agencies saying we need to do something different. It can start with public comments. If we hear enough about a certain subject, we being federal agencies, if we get a lot of the same comments from the public, we'll start looking at it. And eventually, if it's determined to be really something we need to do something about, we might start working on it. A changed condition, whether it's changed usage or whether it's insects and disease that have come into an area and changed the flammability or something like that, these start people talking. And who gets to talk? We all get to talk. In the case of Forefry, it started probably with little different groups of people, both federal and public people, and eventually talking together. We have a very active stakeholder group, over 30 individual people. And some of them got together and put together a study on the supply of small diameter woody material to see if, in fact, we could support an industry. Because as Dennis talked about the costs, we're talking about 2.4 million acres of ponderosa pine in northern Arizona. We can't afford that, and the taxpayers wouldn't be able to fund that. So when we start talking about it, we talk about exactly what is the concern. When we talk about fire behavior, that's usually an issue about control. Can we stop it from going where we want it to go? If we talk about fire effects, that gets into first and second order fire effects where we may kill things we don't want to kill in terms of the forest. We'll get debris flows and mudslides and things like that. At some point, we have to put a boundary around it and say, where is this we're talking about? Is it a spatial, is it a jurisdiction? Is it an ecosystem, a veg type? Exactly where are the boundaries of whatever this area is that we're talking about? In the case of Forefry, it was the ponderosa pine in northern Arizona. Okay, so we said, all right, here's the area. And we, again, this is the public and the federal agencies talking to each other and trying to define the problem in terms of what is it, where is it, what do we want? What is our desired condition for this area? And what is it we can do? What are our options? What can we do about it, assuming we can find the funding? This is what part of the area looks like for Forefry. These areas, the bigger trees here, bigger, older trees, those are the ones that are rarest on the landscape and that we really would like to keep as much as we can of. However, if you think of this in extreme fire conditions, really windy, really hot, really dry, the flame lengths and intensity of the fire in this lower area is most likely going to take out an awful lot of those big guys. If we were to run a prescribed fire under there, low intensity, it'd be hard to kill enough of the little guys without putting the big guys at risk. So it gets a little trickier. This is where we really sometimes have got to use mechanical. This is another type of problematic area. If we use prescribed fire in an area like this, you can imagine the emissions that come out of this kind of stuff. This is where we have big issues with first or second entry burns, where we've got a lot of material that's been building up for years and needs to go away. If you get a minute, there's a small poster in the back by the door that talks in some detail about the difference between a first entry burn, a second entry burn, and a third entry burn in Ponderosa Pine. Areas like this, we're putting firefighters at risk, both in terms of control. If we say, okay, we're going to build a line around this. This is Mexican spotted owl habitat. If we try and let a wildfire burn through there on its terms, we're probably going to get some severity we don't like, even if it does it at night. We're not really sure. Wildfire is not real picky about what it does and doesn't take out always. This was, there we go. Some fire effects after the Schultz fire. There was a crew out there, I think they were doing some bear assessment, and there was a rainstorm. Needless to say, this is not really what we want either. And unfortunately, in that case, that rain event also killed a 9-year-old girl. So we're trying to avoid this. We need to make this not happen to the degree that we can. This is what a healthy forest would look like in Ponderosa Pine. This happens to be in the Gila, but it's very similar to what you'll have in most Ponderosa Pine. It's open. If you have a fire go through here, in dry, hot, windy conditions, it'll torch some trees here and there, maybe a group here and there, but it can't get from crown to crown. And the emissions that would come out, if you look at the forest floor, it's almost all grass. So that's going to be a lot of steam in the emissions, a lot of water. It's going to be quick and dirty and over with in a hurry. And that's what we're trying to get to. We do our first entry burns to take down the fuel load. Second entry takes it down just a little more. And by the time we get to what's pure maintenance burning, the potential emissions off any given acre is much smaller. So 4-Fry includes 4 of the forests. It's actually 5 because the ABRS, but for the moment I need to keep this short. So the green shows the Ponderosa Pine in northern Arizona, approximately 2.4 million acres of national forest land anyway. And the water, which is a rare resource in Arizona, which is also at risk should we get some of these fires. So the 4-Fry groups were looking at the Ponderosa Pine on the national forests. And one of the things that's pretty important is to look at the fire history, as Dennis said a minute ago. So there's Rodeo Chetaskai in the red there, which was one of the reasons 4-Fry is here in the long run. And if you look at the Wallow Fire and Rodeo Chetaskai and think, how many more of those big ones can we fit into here? 2, maybe 3. Let's see if we can avoid that. So it gets down to treating on a landscape scale. As Dennis said again, it's a matter of not treating these little tiny postage stamp sized areas on these huge landscapes. We need to do it at a scale that can make a difference. So the stakeholder group and the Forest Service got together, and this shaded area here is where we decided to start. It's approximately 1.2 million acres of Ponderosa Pine, and we narrowed it down to a mere 600,000 acres on which we're proposing prescribed fire. And 345,000 of that on which we're also proposing to do some mechanical treatments. So what goes into that other than we know it needs to burn? It's a lot of work. There's different levels of NEPA, and this isn't going to be a NEPA class, I promise. I taught one of those 2 days ago, and everybody stayed awake, but that was impressive. The National Environmental Policy Act was enacted January 1st, 1970, and it says that federal agencies must do very thorough analysis to disclose to the public and themselves what they expect to happen for the treatments they're proposing. It doesn't stop us from making bad decisions. We can say, we're proposing X, Y, and Z, and it's going to ruin the water supply for 50,000 people. That decision can still be made as long as we disclosed that that was part of the effect that we thought we might have. But obviously we try and make wise decisions. Having said that, I'm not a decision maker. My job, and most of the people's jobs in the federal agencies, is to supply good information to the people who do make the decisions. So the objectives of 4-Fry were to make this thing really doable. We had to bring the economics to a point where they're going to pay for themselves. And so bringing industry at a size that could do it to the area was really important to making the restoration happen. As defined by the Forest Service, ecological restoration is about structure, composition, ecological function, and patterns on the landscape. So we're thinking if we use fire and mechanical treatments to put back the composition, structure, and pattern, ecological functions will, for the most part, take care of themselves. That's what we're expecting to see. Restoration in terms of patterns, ponderosa pine, historically in much of the Southwest, grew in groups and clumps. So if a fire got up into one group, and we saw this on the Wallow fire, it would maybe torch the whole group out, but then it would go back down to the ground. And so that's kind of the way it's been around for a long time. So it's a really dynamic system. What this is showing is an unthinned forest. It's a tree map. There's the photograph. There's not much of a pattern in here. Post-thinning, we can put it back to where there's more groups and clumps, which would have been more historically healthy. It's more resistant to fire that way as well. And any other disturbances that come along, such as drought and so on, then it's not as competitive within itself. If we get it too dense, it starts dying from the density. The silviculturists say about 40% canopy cover. It's going to start dying just because it's competing so hard with itself. When we talk about composition, that's everything from the forest itself, which is mostly ponderosa pine. But in ponderosa pine forest, most of the diversity is at the forest floor. It's in the grass and the forbs and the shrubs, and they get shaded out when it's too dense. The structure, some of this gets down to habitat for a lot of the creatures that live in the forest or lived in the forest. These days we know we have a little bit more of the squirrel type and a little bit less of the pronghorn type in terms of critters out there. There's always going to be somebody else's trash is somebody else's treasure, so we may lose a few squirrels, but we'll get more pronghorn. The reverse is what happened when we didn't do anything. So we put these together and work on them with multiple resources, as NEPA defines that it has to be a multi-disciplinary analysis. So we've involved everybody from archaeology, recreation, wildlife, silviculture. Anything that could possibly be involved was considered in order to put this back. And when we had discussions about this is what we're thinking we need to do, so there's generally, at least in the Forest Service, it's fire, silviculture, and engineering that do things to the other resources or do things that the other resources have to account for. And then it's wildlife and archaeology and recreation and botany and the others, which need to help those of us who do understand what's going to work and what isn't in terms of their resource. So all of these areas did their own reports. Mine is available. I'll put it on the back table if anybody wants to see the final report. For fire, ecology, fuels, and air quality, I think it's about 400 pages, but I have flagged the areas that deal in red that deal with air quality. How am I doing on time? 7 minutes, okay. So I'll go through real quickly then what I did to look at the fire ecology and air quality issues that we thought would come up. This on the right, your right, is potential fire behavior. So active crown fire, that's the red, that's a really bad thing. And ponderosa pine, it will kill the pine. The yellow is okay, that's where you get group torching or individual trees expected to torch, and the surface fire is blue. On this side, where it turns into a hot color is where we're getting surface fuel loading that we really need to be concerned about or at least take a hard look at. Where it's dark blue is where we would expect it to potentially get to a bad place in a relatively short period of time. So this was, you can't see in the back, so Flagstaff is right around there, and Interstate 70 goes down there, 17, this is I-40, and Williams is over here. So this is fire behavior, and this is surface fuel loading. This is what we have for existing condition. This is our proposed action. I'll go back and forth a couple of times. So our preferred alternative would change the fire potential in a huge way, and also the reason we have surface fuel loading is twofold. One is surface effects, particularly to the soil, where we might end up getting the soil would be sterilized, or it would burn out the seed bank, or things like that. And also because this is looking just at duff, litter, and coarse woody debris. And duff and coarse woody debris in particular are where we get a lot of smoldering smoke emissions coming out, and that's a bad thing if it goes on for too long. That's where we get some of our worst air quality issues. So it's going to change if we can do it this way. We did, because of public comments that we're really concerned about the potential smoke coming out, of the, it would be on average 40 to 60,000 acres, probably closer to 40 at least initially, 1,000 acres of prescribed fire on this landscape. And Vic gets to be the one who runs about half of that. Trying to figure that one out, we'll work with him. So we did this alternative. This is alternative D for the 4-Fry, responding to people who were concerned about air quality effects where they live, particularly downstream in the Verde Valley. And in this alternative, we would be either burning or thinning on any given acre. We would not do both anywhere. So there's only about 170,000 acres of prescribed fire, and it still maintains the 340 some odd thousand acres of mechanical treatments. This is, when you're looking at a landscape this big, it doesn't really make sense to try and say exactly where the smoke is going to go, because that depends on which part of the landscape we're trying to burn or where the ignitions come if it's a wildfire. So I looked at the different potential outputs. So this first column is what would happen if a wildfire burned with existing condition. And for those of you in the back, I don't know if you can see, we'll just say these are different ignitions. The details are in my report if you're interested. This is what happens if a wildfire burns after there's been a prescribed fire. The second one is after there's been 2 prescribed fires and after the 3rd prescribed fire. So the same burning conditions, but after just prescribed fire treatments. And this is obviously way too many details, but this is just to show some of the other analysis that we included, which is under different treatment intensities, which are represented here, meaning high intensity where we're changing it a lot. It's going from really dense to not very dense at all. Or the darker ones down here are where we're either not doing much of anything, or it's going from really dense to maybe not really dense. And this is talking about the surface fuel loading in 2010, existing condition, immediate post-treatment, and then 30 years later if nothing else happened, no fire, no mechanical treatments or anything like that. So stakeholder group, always have to give them a lot of credit. They've been really amazing to work with. They're an extremely knowledgeable group of people. They've done some of the analyses for us. They wrote the adaptive management plan, which will be coming out in the FEIS inside of a month now. They're pretty cool, and they keep us on track, and vice versa. So it's been a really good experience. So overall, real quickly, the discussion on 4-Fry started with an event and a discussion amongst stakeholders and the government on what can we do, what needs to change. I'm not going to go through all this because we're just about out of time. But we went through all the processes that we had expected to in terms of analysis involving the public. Our stakeholder group meets every month, and it amazes me. Sometimes they get mad at each other, and they might go stomping off into the corner, and then they'll come back because they know, as we do, this has to happen. We can't keep treating small areas. And what we tell people on the impacts of the smoke is that we would expect there to be more days of the year when there's going to be smoke in the air. And when we're doing our first entry burns, we're going to see more smoke. We're not going to exceed the NACs, the clean air regs, but we would expect there to be more days of smoke as we get this up online. So that's me on coffee.